or so. Water bottle in the car.
Okay, let's get started. Well, welcome to the Wildlife and Parks Commission meeting in Topeka. And we'll start with the introduction of commissioners and staff.
Bill S. Carino, Garden City, Kansas.
Troy Spohr, Oakley.
Emmerich Cross, Kansas City.
Gerald Lauber, Topeka.
Lauren Quayle Sill, Hutchinson.
Warren Gefeller, Russell.
Delia Lister, Pittsburgh.
Sheila Camus, commission support.
Jason Dixon, Commission support.
Stuart Schrog, Deputy Secretary out of Pratt.
Brad Lovelace, Topeka.
Christopher Kennedy, Topeka, new secretary.
Terry Bruce, legal counsel, Pratt.
Okay, now, as many of you know, this is my last meeting, and I want to thank everybody from the staff and everybody I've worked with all these years. It's been an honor, and I've enjoyed it very much. I'm also going to take this opportunity to introduce Whitney Dameron. Whitney is coming on the commission starting next month, and we welcome him aboard.
I just say, thank you, Chairman Lauber and members of the commission. I look forward to working with all of you and getting to know you as well as working with the agency. It is an honor to be asked to do this by the governor, and it's more than a little bit intimidating to succeed you, Chairman Lauber, for all you've done all these years. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Brad, did you have?
I think, Mr. Chair, I think we're ready. We'll wait for my remarks later and I'll do another introduction of some new staff and that kind of thing, if that's all right, when we get to Secretary's remarks, okay?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
What do you want to do now?
So let's just go right ahead with your additions and deletions to the agenda.
All right, is there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
There is a revised agenda that was not in the briefing book, so the new ones are on the table out there, and I gave them to each of you. So under public hearing, Levi Jasser is presenting item number 1154-11, not Matt Peak. Under Secretary's remarks section, Terry Bruce will be presenting the legislative update. Well, Martin DeBoer will be doing the legislative update. Sorry about that. Instead of Dan Riley. Terry will be in charge of questions on the pending items at the end of the afternoon. Okay, under workshop session, Tom Podrosky will be presenting the webless migratory bird regulations in place of Rich Schultes. He is online, but he's not going to present. Also, the 2024 waterfowl season briefing item was changed. New copies are on the table. And as the handouts in the back.
Are there any changes to the minutes, any deletions or corrections? If not, I'd like a motion that they be approved.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All approved, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, now we're going into the public hearing portion. To start with Levi Jaster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Levi Jaster, Employee Research and Survey Office. The proposed regulation is KR 115-4-11. We've seen this multiple times heading up to this. And all this is doing is cleaning up some language that when we changed this regulation, I believe a couple of years ago now, for a reason, old language was left in place. And so we have pulled that back out and gotten it to where it was. So it's got all that dead wood removed. But it deals with the Antelope preference point system in the draw to where the change we made was to eliminate being able to get a preference point in the same year that you buy an over-the-counter tag, as far as competing and trying to help reduce point creep and distribute tags a little better.
Okay. Are there any questions for Levi on this? Well, we need a motion for approval.
Commissioner Gefeller, move to approve.
Commissioner Sill, second.
We've had a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Any discussion from the public? Any discussion from staff? Okay, Sheila.
Commissioner Cross,
Yes.
Commissioner Escarino,
Yes.
Commissioner Gefeller.
Yes.
Commissioner Lister,
Yes.
Commissioner Sill,
Yes.
Commissioner Spore,
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber,
Yes.
pass 7-0.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we have KAR 115-25-1, fur bearers, open season, bag limits, Matt.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. Yes, this is KR 115-25-11, fur bearer open season and bag limits. The proposed change to this regulation would extend the raccoon and possum harvest season to year round, but would limit traps used outside the existing fur bearer season to cage and foot encapsulating or dog proof type traps. The department will monitor harvest that occurs during this new season through the annual fur bearer harvest survey. And if the pelt market and harvest and related harvest for these species recovers in the future, we would revisit this open season with strong favor towards fur harvesters who traditionally make use of the animals. So if the pelt market changed, this season might go away at some point in the future. A little bit of the background information, since this has been in this regulation has been in the promulgation process for a long time. But if there are questions about how we got to this recommendation, the raccoon population has been on a long-term, like 40-year population increase in the state. And the population of raccoons is thought by some to be having a detrimental impact on some species, either indirectly as a disease vector, particularly I brought up in the past canine distemper impacting gray fox populations that's potentially being maintained by raccoons. But then also, of course, the thing the commission has heard the most about is predation of game species like turkeys and quail. But our average harvest has declined for raccoon by over 50% since about 2015. And since that time, pelt prices have been below the cost of actually, of running a trap line for them, like in the range of $3 averages in recent years. So, and that's for put up stuff. And so not very productive for fur trappers to target them. And I've also presented in the past some information on the population, what it would take from a harvest perspective to affect population. And it's unlikely that this is going to result in any meaningful population level effect, but it is at this time, it seems to be the popular public sentiment to open things up on them, even amongst the fur harvesters themselves, who would typically be the strongest advocates for the fur bearer species. Only about 12% of them in the harvest surveys we've conducted oppose any type of it, only about 12% of them would oppose this regulation change. So even the vast majority of the fur harvesters themselves are in support. So with that, I think that's all I have to say, and I'll turn this back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Does anybody have any questions for Matt?
I would have one. Matt, I read through here and see no mention of hounds in there, but
So might be it, yeah.
it does include the hounds, correct?
Yes.
It said hunting, but it didn't.
Right.
It
Yeah.
didn't spell out when the
Fur
equipment unit.
harvesting implies hunting and trapping, and we limited the traps, but all of the legal methods of hunting are still valid, including hound hunting.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was what I believed it was that. But
Yes.
I didn't want to let it go without being asked.
And identify yourself for the.
I'm sorry. My name is Ken Hickman, with the Kansas Federation of Houndsmen.
Okay,
All right, thank you.
thank you. Any other questions? Any other comments? I need a motion. Somebody move that we approve this.
Commissioner Spore, I move.
Commissioner Sill, second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve KAR 115-2511. Is there any discussion? Any discussion from the commission? Any discussion from the public? Hearing none. Sheila?
Commissioner Cross?
Yes.
Commissioner Escarino?
Yes.
Commissioner Gefeller?
Yes.
Commissioner Lister?
Yes.
Commissioner Sill?
Yes.
Commissioner Spore?
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber?
Yes.
Pass 7-0.
Okay, KAR 115. 3010. Personal watercraft definitions, requirements, restrictions. Eric?
Thank you, Chairman, and members of the commission. This is kind of a cleaning up and updating on the language. So a few years back, we updated the the PFD law. So basically, a few years back, the Coast Guard changed the terminology. They didn't change the requirement. They just changed the terminology. It used to be a type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they went to a different system. And so we had updated the PFD regulation a few years back, and we missed the personal watercraft regulation that specifies what kind of life jackets required on the personal watercraft. So basically, what we're proposing is to remove the requirement of the type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and just make it any U.S. Coast Guard approved life jacket. There shouldn't be any effect on any of the citizens or anything like that. No cost. We still allow the older type 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 life jackets. We're just including the new terminology as well. So, and it's also a requirement to keep our U.S. Coast Guard funding to follow the U.S. Coast Guard laws. So, realistically, no effect on the citizens at all. So,
Okay. Could I have a motion for approval?
Commissioner Cross moved to approve.
Commissioner Ford, second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve KAR 115-3010. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Any discussion? Hearing none. Sheila?
Commissioner Cross.
Yes.
Commissioner Escarino,
Yes.
Commissioner Gefeller,
Yes.
Commissioner Lister,
Yes.
Commissioner Sill,
Yes.
Commissioner Sporter,
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber,
Yes.
pass 7-0.
Thank you.
Okay, Levi, you have secretary's orders for deer. Now, we don't vote on this, do we?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, we don't vote on this, but today I do have a presentation on it, just to go over how these, how the secretary's orders deer quotas are developed. And just to all right, now, there we go. So just kind of to cover some of the key fundamentals of why we've got a draw system in place. So Kansas wants a healthy and sustainably managed deer herd. And to that effect, the draw was implemented by state law, actually, in statute. And, you know, our deer herd is an investment in our state, but we want to live off the interest. We don't want to, you know, cut into it to where we harm ourselves. And so it lets Kansans utilize the resources that they live with on a regular basis. And yet also, you know, can bring in and be able to share that with non-residents too. And those fair distribution of permits that are by necessity limited in number. And so with that then is to, you know, gives us a set application period for everybody to come in. It's the same application. The fees are known ahead of time. And in the case of our system, relative to a lot of the draw systems across the country, we're fairly predictable. Ours is rather simple compared to most states' draw systems. And generally the only, you know, way that you get an advantage in this system is to either not get a permit the year before, if you were trying, or to give up your chance to put into the draw that year and just get a preference point for next year. And so then that, you know, the following year you have a high chance, in case of our system right now, about 100% chance if you have a preference point of getting a tag. So the quotas are based on both biological and social carrying capacity. We look at quite a bit of different information involved, from population, harvest, but also to landowner comments, hunter comments. And but right now the demand is surpassing the supply that we have. And we have a much higher percentage of non-resident hunters than other Midwest states. And what we're seeing with that is that hunter tolerance for non-residents low and declining. And generally what many of them state is a loss of access, and that's both real and perceived in some cases. I mean, many people have lost access. In some cases, it's I can't go knock on a door and hunt the best property for deer near town anymore. They may still be able to get somewhere else, but you know, it's not that best place or a place that they maybe did used to hunt. And then in Kansas, we have a very low percentage of public land that's open to hunting. We've got less than 2% of public land in Kansas, and not all of that's open to hunting. Yet public land accounts for about 8 to 10% of our deer harvest in a lot of years. So it's the use there, and what comes off of our public lands is well out of proportion with the amount of area we have to hunt. And non-residents harvest fewer antlerless deer than per hunter than our residents do. So that's you know, we've got to work our residents into controlling deer herds. And with the system, landowners retain the valuable commodity that they have, and that's access to their property. So they can still make money off of it. They just don't necessarily control the tags in a lottery system. And it is a lottery system. The quotas do basically, once they're set in place, they would guarantee the number of tags that'll be available in a unit. So even if they're not all drawn, then what's left would go into a leftover and be for sale over the counter, first come, first served. Currently, recently, we've not had any leftovers due to demand, but it's there. And not every individual is guaranteed a permit in that sense. So in general, two people that apply that have the same number of preference points have the same chance of getting a permit in the same unit. And so just to kind of cover, what our deer management units are, since it's important to the conversation, you can see the 18 original units that we use. This is what the quotas are put into. So each one of these units has its own quota. You may have heard of Deer Management Unit 19, which is kind of the I-70 corridor between Kansas City and Topeka. And what that is that just bolsters the opportunity to harvest antlerless deer. There's no either sex tags applied to that. It's just with Unit 10 traditionally, or last several years, has been only one antlerless tag in low numbers across the whole unit, but 19 over top of that down in the south end gives a greater opportunity to harvest antlerless deer in more urban areas where we need it to try to reduce deer vehicle accidents and other deer conflicts. A quick statewide summary here. So up in that far left corner, upper left corner, is the number of permits. They've not changed a lot over time, but we are 2 years off of our peak number we've ever issued before. And then next to that is the state average deer density. And the numbers aren't really of concern here. It's more of, you look at the trend lines and the changes along the line over time. And to further illustrate the point, and this is a simplified population model here. And what I'm illustrating is that, as over 10 years, if the deer herd can grow, we start down over here, and that dark black line is the total number of deer. And over time, this red line right below that is the number of antlerless deer, this number of does in the population. Versus that blue dotted line down low here, that's the number of bucks in the population. And so when we're issuing an either sex permit, most people are targeting a buck if they can with that permit. And with our harvest, what we see is about half of our hunters harvest, or half of our deer harvest is made up of bucks, and the other half is does. It bounces around. If it's one is going to be a little higher than another, generally bucks are a little higher than does in our harvest in Kansas. And so we have a disproportional effect on that buck number, but with that number growing so slowly, even in what might be termed pretty strong growth potential with that population model, those bucks just aren't there within it. They're not making up a full 50% to where you can issue more tags easily. So a lot of times tags don't necessarily change very well, or as much as we think they might as deer numbers increase. Generally, what we see is we're pretty stable on bucks per 100 does across the state with our survey efforts. But again, we have a more difficult time classifying all the bucks, especially with those young bucks. But generally that stays pretty stable, and we can affect it on a large scale very easily without really hurting things. We've got to be careful to just kind of maintain that, but we want to maintain that too, so that there's good opportunity, and we've got new deer coming down the pipeline. And then our fawns per 100 does over time have been declining, and there's a couple different reasons why that occurs. And the reasons, we've got one of the reasons mostly in the west and the other reason in the east. Generally, if habitat's really poor, you see poor fawn survival. You don't have very many fawns out there. When deer numbers get high, resources start becoming limited, and so does start having fewer fawns with high densities, and that's what we're seeing more in the east. So there's some slowdown there, but in the west, it's too few deer and poor because of poor habitat. In the east, too many deer causes poor habitat to slow down. But the statewide summary really doesn't tell a very good picture of what's going on across the state. Too much of what happens in one area is covered up by what's happening in another area. So even though in this case, we're seeing some population growth in recent years, that's really only occurring in the east and not really the west. And so, right now we're kind of two different states in one. So the two graphs over there on the left side of the screen are two of our western units. And, the general trend out there is down. And even in some cases where we're up this year, being up, we're still below kind of the average across time out there. If you move into central Kansas, it's kind of that, just a train of stability in a lot of those units. We're hovering right around the averages. Even that top graph, I threw the average across all the years of the survey up there just to see where that falls, and we just bounce right around it there. And other units are up and down, but we're still, kind of hovering around that middle ground. Now, if you go to eastern Kansas, we're growing. We've got a growing deer herd in eastern Kansas. And even in a unit like Unit 12, where the trend over the last few years has actually been down, we're still have a lot of deer there. And so, it's not just the population that goes into setting tags. So what information does actually go into it? And we have quite a bit that goes into it. So we've got population estimates, harvest numbers, deer vehicle crashes, sex ratios, age structure, reproduction, crop damage. We also have landowner opinions, public hunter opinions, we include disease, what permits were issued before, what's the demand for permits, are we in an urban area? And we also utilize our biologist input. And I mentioned that the draw was put in place by statute before, and there is some information that we're required to use in that statute. And so to highlight that, those are the 7 different bits of information are required to use by statute. But in general, what we see is it's not really enough information to go in there. And currently, if you limited it to only those 7 pieces of information without the rest of that, we'd actually be issuing fewer tags than we are right now. So it was 5 out of all 18 units actually would increase if you limited it. The rest of them would decrease. And it was about a 500 permit decrease difference between what we are at and what those pieces would include. And when we use that information, we're not necessarily just using last year's information. In some cases, like deer vehicle accidents, there's actually a delay. I won't get the 2023 accident data till later this summer, once KDOT has that put together. And then other pieces, most of the pieces we're using, we actually work from a 3-year average versus the 5-year trend. And so we're looking back to see where they're going and what's going on. And one of the big things that we don't want to work from just a single year's worth of data is illustrated down in this plot down in the lower right corner. That's 2020, and that's the bars of the total number of deer vehicle accidents that occurred in Kansas that year. Well, the number was down, and we could celebrate, and hey, that's great. We're not hitting as many deer population must be down, so we're not hitting as many. When you actually standardize it across the time by the number of miles we drive in Kansas, we were basically the same as the year before. The drop was because nobody was driving during COVID. So that reduced people on the roads. We had fewer accidents. But if you solely use that 1 year's worth of data, you might make a poor decision over time. And then up in that upper right, that's the lighter colors indicate where crop damage complaints are. And so just kind of illustrate where that's changed over time, and where we take that into account with that. And so it really works better to not just use a single year's worth of data to where you get kind of knee-jerk reactions and really make major changes. And with this, rather than setting the permits at a stable number for several years and then having drastic changes, by changing every year, we have more incremental changes where people can adjust easier to it than, what if we had a unit that we set it the same for 5-6 years and suddenly we got to cut 500-600 tags out of it. That's a drastic change that's really going to affect folks. Whereas, maybe we can make smaller changes, people can adjust, but those smaller changes may have an effect over that time that we wouldn't get otherwise. And that forces us into that drastic change. But we get a lot of questions about why are getting permits harder if the numbers, we're not really changing very much. We've been fairly stable on permit numbers over time. We are coming off of our highest number a couple of years back, like I said before, but the number of applications has just drastically increased in the last few years. We had 1 year, it was a 27% increase in number of applicants. So it's going to be harder to get a permit if more people are trying for those permits. And, again, just because we saw there's sometimes the statewide trend doesn't tell you the full story. Just to compare a couple of other units, some of our units had been, very popular, selected pretty heavily. Unit 1, where we're seeing some big declines in deer numbers, applications are starting to drop off. And yet now we're still increasing and it's heading back up. Same thing with Unit 5. We'd always been a little bit, but it's really jumped away from where we were. And then other units that traditionally had not had that many people applying on their first choice are now above the quotas. So the last few years, we've had more applicants than we've had permits in the quota everywhere versus previous years where there were some that were always below the quota. How about resident permits? And some of those permits are draw permits also. In this case, it's the either sex, either species permits, what many people would just refer to as a rifle mule deer tag. We hunt mule deer in the 2 zones for residents. We have a west zone and an east zone, illustrated on the map. Generally, our population numbers, declines pretty well across. It's kind of up and down, but a lot of that noise in the data is low numbers that are hard to survey without logistically impossible surveys right now. In fact, last year in our east zone, we had so few observations of mule deer that we couldn't even estimate a population density out there. I will point out that the peak up here for the mule deer is around 2 per square mile. So it's still low densities and getting lower. So how about our permits and our applications? The top there is the east zone. We've been cutting permits down. West zone's also been getting cut. And in this case for mule deer, we've got a very good population model that came out of our research project with Kansas State University that indicated that we needed to cut our mule deer tags down and reduce harvest to benefit the population. And then just to see the draw rates for each of those units, our residents have actually suffered some of the lowest draw rates that we've had for a long time. So, and then to get into the actual quotas for this coming 2024 season, generally what the trend is if you're in the west, there's permits that are getting cut. If you're in the east, we've added some, except in the case of Unit 12. Unit 12, that cut is more in response to landowner desires than anything else. But in unit one, we got 510 tags, which is a cut of 75 tags. 334 tags is in unit two, which is a decline of 45. Unit three, there's 813, which is a decline of 89. Unit four has 475 tags, which is a decline of 19. Unit five has 680, which is a reduction of 32. Unit six is 565, which is an increase of 21. Unit seven has 1,520 tags, which is a reduction of 62. The unit eight has 1,865 permits, which is a reduction of 35. Unit nine has 1,182 tags, which is an increase of 50. Unit 10 has 1,339 permits, which is an increase of 43. Unit 11 has 3,429 permits, which is an increase of 60. 12 again has 2,189, which is a reduction of 54. Unit 13 has 615 permits, which is an increase of 28. Unit 14 has 2,006 permits, which is an increase of 45. Unit 15 has 1,625 permits, which is an increase of 41. 16 has 1,786 permits, which is a decrease of 28. And DMU 17 has 634, which is a decrease of 22. And 18 has 248, which is a decrease of 10. And since traditionally we've read that, that's where we are with those, with the changes from last year. Mule deer permit stamps, which in this case have extremely low draw odds right now, generally on the order of single digit percents. But to draw a mule deer stamp, you actually have to draw a whitetail permit first. And then only those that are successful are able to, getting a whitetail permit, are able to draw for a mule deer stamp. And the mule deer stamp is random, completely random. There's no preference point allowance in that or anything. And so generally, we've been reducing those numbers too over time. The big changes this year will be in units 4 and 5, where no stamps will be issued for non-residents. For residents, either species, the east zone, there'll be 68 either species, either sex permits issued, which is a change of a reduction of 7. And the west zone will have 1,072, which is a reduction of 98. So 105 less permits total for that. And for antlerless permits, we won't be changing anything this year, although next year I suspect we'll be making some changes to that. And we're also, as we've done for the last several years, we're not issuing any either species antlerless only permits. And with that, I would take questions over the secretary's orders for your quotas.
Does anybody have any questions for Levi?
This is only for rifle. Everything you just talked about, rifle.
No, the non-resident permits, that's the quota. It's for all of the weapon categories. When a non-resident draws, they put in for the unit, and then they can specify the weapon. And what the weapon does, it doesn't change their draw chance in the unit, but what it does is change when and how they can hunt. So if you put in for a rifle, you'll get a rifle whitetail tag, and you'll be limited to hunting during rifle season. But you could also put in for archery and hunt the entire archery season, including during rifle season, but you'll be limited to archery equipment. So it's one quota, and choice of weapon doesn't change your odds within it. It's just the total number of people that apply to that unit as their first choice.
What about muzzleloader?
Muzzleloader's in the mix for non-residents too. For residents, those are the rifle tags. The archery and the muzzleloader permits are still over the counter for residents for either species. So muzzleloader, you'll be limited to the zone you drew, and then during muzzleloader rifle season, but you can go buy the permit over the counter as a resident. And then archery is still statewide over the counter.
Muzzleloader used to be any species.
The muzzleloader permit isn't any species, you're just limited to a zone. So it still is.
And have you reduced the number of tags for muzzleloader in 1 and 2?
Not yet, because they're still over the counter. It's something we're discussing doing, potentially with the changes in mule deer, moving everybody to the draw, including archery. And
But
doing
not
away
this
with
coming- not this
coming season. We're too late to change regulations in time for this year's season.
Not to put you on the spot, but what's the increase of muzzleloader, any species tags?
Not that we actually don't have that many. So they've not increased much, if at all. In fact, generally with some of the muzzleloader permits, what we see is when I do the postseason harvest survey, I get complaints because, well, I got this last year. Well, there's so few of them, I have to send them all a survey to get enough information. So it is surprising. Muzzleloader is a surprisingly underutilized hunt in Kansas compared to archery and rifle.
I'm seeing that if you want to kill a muley, you go muzzleloader, basically in 1 and 2.
So, and it's a kind of a unique opportunity compared to a lot of states, our September muzzleloader season, including for whitetails, because it's an opportunity to find a buck potentially still in velvet on a summer pattern for forage. So, but you're also going to have to hunt when it's potentially 95-100 degrees sometimes.
Levi, I apologize. The reduction in 12, could you explain that again? Because we've been increasing antlerless seasons there. And now you're saying, and we've been hearing complaints, and now you're saying they want less. And I missed something, I think.
The landowners in 12 want a drastic increase in antlerless deer harvest, but they are getting very fed up with the number of non-residents in that unit. And it's not just the draw permit hunters, it's also non-resident landowners. What I've done, excuse me, I have gone down there a couple times to visit with the landowners and tour farms and stuff. And often what we'll see down there is a bean field that looks like somebody set the brush hog at about 6 inches off the ground and mowed the entire field. And when you walk through it, every plant has been nipped off. What their complaint is that the guy hunting across the fence is a non-resident and is not shooting any deer. And in some cases they've talked to him. In some cases, they don't even know who it is anymore. And the complaint was both, some cases it's a non-resident landowner that's only coming to hunt deer and doesn't know what's going on the rest of the year, is their comments. Other cases, it's this guy's leasing and he'll only shoot a buck. So we want to see fewer of them. We want to try to get more antlerless harvest.
Okay. I have one other question. Generally, residents are a better way to control antlerless. We give an antlerless permit to our not successful non-resident draw applicants. Those are not, do you have a rough percentage on how effectively those are used?
Well, an unsuccessful, yes, to a successful non-resident, you get a combination permit. So you have an either sex permit and an antlers permit. And in that case, looking back to when we switched to just getting a buck permit or an either sex permit and not having the antlers attached with it or buying that with it, to when we, the next year when we swapped to that, we quadrupled the number of permits for antlerless deer that were in the hands of non-residents. They'd already bought it. They had to come. We did not even see the number of antlerless deer that they took double. So we did not get, it was when they put that in place, the expectation at the time, which that was from 2012 to 2013, was to see the non-resident harvest of antlerless deer increased by about 11 to 12,000 animals, and it increased to increased by 4,000.
Do you see a difference with non-residents hunt your own land permits? Are those folks, they have to pay for their antlerless?
Yes.
Is there any better trend among those non-residents than our general draw applicants?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
So
Levi, in the history of declining tags and allowing the, limited permits, what growth have we seen in the deer in western Kansas? Have we seen any growth in that area? I know it's declined over many years, and I've had some people question me about the declining deer in western Kansas.
and right now, a large part of our problem in western Kansas is we can't make it rain. And so in a lot of cases, we've cut the tags and we've not seen a change upward in that case. We may have lessened the downward decline with those cuts and reductions.
Okay.
We're hitting the point in some of that where our resident hunters are self-regulating and not harvesting as many deer. And so there's some changes there too. And so in some cases, what we're changing is just kind of catching up to what's going on too.
Okay.
But we'll be, again, because of the regulation cycle and where certain things occur in regulation as far as our antlerless harvest, that's something that's going to be on the docket going into this next cycle, is changing that out in western Kansas too. We've left some antlerless opportunity in place dealing with chronic wasting disease, but at this point we're likely going to be cutting back on that opportunity. We're at low enough numbers now that we're not going to see any additional harvest anyways,
right?
Because everybody's self-regulating themselves.
Okay. I received a phone call from a constituent in eastern Kansas with regards to it was a landowner that drew a permit for a landowner, and they wanted to know if there is any opportunity for them to transfer their tag or permit over to someone that comes in and hunts on their land, as a maybe giving to an outfitter and letting them give that permit to someone else. Is there an opportunity, or is there any of that in the works?
We don't have any transferable permits.
Okay.
And we're not looking to make changes in that direction. We're discussing some other options.
Okay. Well, I told them I'd bring it up, so I got the opportunity to do that. So I think that answers the question.
We had them before.
Mr. Chairman, Phil Escarino. I received some calls from some individuals in some lakes in southwest Kansas, and they had some questions with regard to how budgets are developed for the different lakes or state parks in the state, and how those monies are distributed throughout the state parks in the state for just upkeep and maybe some other things in the parks that may need some opportunity for some development or that type of stuff. Can someone share with me that information?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Esperino. That's a pretty complex process, and I can tell you the leadership has a pot of money that they divide up. And so there's a lot of give and take in setting priorities. But we'd be glad to talk with that person directly and see what their questions or concerns are. And then we can address those directly if that's all right.
Sure.
Okay,
Makes sense.
all right. Well, no public comment on non-agenda items.
Mr. Chair. I do have one online.
Okay,
Jordan Ford, I'm gonna unmute you now, so you should be able to come on.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can.
All right, give me just a second. I'm sorry, I was a little unprepared here. I think that's who you sent it to. Okay, sorry about that. I apologize. My name's Jordan Ford. I'm a Kansas resident hunter. I'm from Wichita, Kansas. I appreciate the time to speak today, and thank you guys for accepting constructive feedback as you guys consider the proposal on non-resident hunting on public lands. First, I think it's important to emphasize that the idea of trying to create a better hunting experience for resident Kansas waterfowl hunters is one that should be commended. I fully support and respect Kansas Parks and Wildlife and the Commission's authority in considering this proposal on public lands that they own, lease, and or manage. I know that my opinion on this matter will probably disappoint some of you guys listening, and even some of my peers that I've shared the blind with. However, I feel that the proposal as drafted creates a scenario that will have cascading negative impacts on both private and public land access for all waterfowl hunters in Kansas, residents included. Restricting an entire user group to less than 50% of the season on the majority of public lands will likely lead to an artificially inflated price for the cost of leasing private land for hunting access in the state for both residents and non-residents. And resident duck hunters who have long enjoyed access to private ground from neighbors, family, and friends will likely see that access diminish as a result of this proposal, as more and more private landowners are approached to lease land to duck hunters. Additionally, this proposal will likely create an increased use of guides and outfitters on days where non-residents cannot access public ground, again, resulting in more private land being leased at higher rates. With no real meaningful regulation on the waterfowl guiding and outfitting community or really industry in this state, this proposal will only exacerbate an already growing problem in the waterfowl community here in the state of Kansas. Kansas Parks and Wildlife should instead focus their attention on the root cause of the issue, which is the amount of high quality publicly available access for duck hunters. Kansas ranks at the bottom of the list in terms of number of acres available for hunting access. Even with programs like WEHA, Kansas duck hunters only have access to a small portion of quality areas to pursue waterfowl. I, like many others in the past, urge the Commission to refer to the North American model of conservation, the greatest and most effective model used in the world, and use scientifically proven facts to ultimately drive decision-making. If worries of ducks experiencing too much pressure on public waters is the issue, then why wouldn't that worry carry over to private lands as well? Hunters need ducks, and ducks need hunters. If the main concern is also a need for change because of a busy boat ramp at the bottoms, then again, I think the Commission needs to focus efforts on more quality public access for duck hunters. To end my statement, I ask that the Commission throw out this proposal. The trickling effects that it will create will have a massive impact on Kansas resident hunters. So thank you guys for your time and your consideration.
thank you. Is there any more online?
Yes, we also have a Greg. I'm not gonna mispronounce her last name. I'm gonna unmute you now.
Right.
Thank you very much. Greg Beaker. So Hayes, Kansas, just wanted to reach out to the Commission. Thank you for everything you do. Just wanted to get an update. And if you could, and I apologize, I just joined a little bit late. So if there's been an update on this, please let me know. But would you guys have any updates, and ladies as well, on the proposed supplemental feed ban in Kansas?
Yeah, Brad Lovelace, Wildlife and Parks. So there's been no proposed feed ban. There's been no suggestion by staff that a regulation be developed. And so, yeah, there's no movement on any ban toward feeding on private land.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, Jason, is that it?
That is all I have.
Okay. Well, now we'll move on to the department report.
All right, so for Secretary's remarks, we'll start at the top. Very pleased to introduce our brand new secretary, Chris Kennedy. We really appreciate the governor appointing him. He's hit the ground running. This is just his second week. He's already wearing me out. And Secretary Kennedy.
Thank you, Chairman Lauber. Thank you, members of the commission, staff, and the public. And definitely thank you, Brad. I think it's a privilege to work side by side with you, and it allows me to speed up my learning curve, being able to have a little bit of overlap in our duties. So I really appreciate that. As mentioned, my name is Christopher Kennedy. I'm thrilled to be standing here today to address you all as a department secretary. The conservation and protection of our natural resources have been at the core of my professional and personal being for more than I care to advertise, although the grays in my head advertise enough. But each of those years have undoubtedly brought me to this role right here, right now, with all of you. As I'm sure many of you have seen the formal announcement of my appointment through Governor Kelly's newsroom, and have likely already learned a little bit about my background. What is yet to be publicized are the great things that we're going to accomplish. And I say we very purposefully. Good conservation takes all of us. It takes the public. It takes our biologists. It takes our game wardens. It takes our partners, our members of the legislature. It takes our commissioners, our commission chair, our federal counterparts. It's also going to take all of us to ensure that this department, that Kansas's natural resources and our constituents continue to thrive. I've been in this industry long enough to know that the challenges facing us right now are very real. So I won't pretend the road ahead will be easy, nor will I guarantee that we'll always agree. But we'll be undoubtedly clear and inarguable are our shared goals, our mission, the things we value as conservationists, the way we will show up with staff and as commissioners, and the standards we hold each other to moving forward. Achieving greatness is a team act. It's not a solo mission. I need your help. So help me, help you, help them, help us all to be great. Knowing that every day I get to hold this title, I'll be showing up the same way for all of you. I thank you in advance for showing up as your best selves today. And every day to follow, I look forward to standing back up here a month from now, a year from now, 3 years from now, continuing to make progress on these important issues, and also to celebrate the great accomplishments that I know are to come. With that, I stand for any questions that you all may have. Thank you all, and I look forward to serving all of you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those remarks. Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'll continue with our budget report. So we are currently approaching the 9-month mark of fiscal year 2024, which started last July 1st. And we'll give you a breakdown as we do each commission meeting of our 4 principal fee funds, along with the cash balances. First, the park fee fund revenue sources include entrance fees, camping fees, and annual passes to the Kansas State Parks. February revenue totaled just over $500,000, 582,000 to be precise, and that's about a 25% increase compared to the average for that month in recent years. So that's good news. Our fiscal year-to-date revenue stands at $8.2 million. which reflects growth from the previous year figures, partially attributed to some payback of monies that were owned by our licensing agent, Aspira. The cash balance at the end of February was a healthy $7 million. Under cabin revenue, the net revenue from cabin rentals across state parks and public land location was almost $112,000 in February. Fiscal year-to-date revenue stands at $686,000, which is a 36% increase compared to the same period last year. So again, good news. Wildlife Fee Fund, our biggest fee fund, revenue for this comes from hunting and fishing licenses, big game permits and tags. And those revenues totaled $1.7 million in February, which was above the previous February's revenue. Fiscal year-to-date revenue amounts to just over $14 million. And the cash balance in the Wildlife Fee Fund as of the end of February stood at $18.9 million. Lastly, our boat fee fund, revenue for this fee fund comes from boat registrations, and just over $90,000 was contributed in February. And that is an increase from the previous year and recent years average for February. Fiscal year-to-date revenue is about $673,000. The cash balance in the boat fee fund as of February closed at $2.5 million. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd stand for any questions.
Any questions for Brad?
And if there are no questions, I'd like to pass the microphone to Martin DeBoer. Martin is our new manager of governmental relations, who's just been on how many weeks? 3 weeks? 3.5 weeks. So he's pretty new too. Martin will give you an update on legislative issues.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman, Commissioners. Again, my name is Martin DeBoer, the Government Relations Manager. Came over from Legislative Research, where I worked since late 2019 on budget, staffed many of these legislative committees, so a little bit of my background there. I do notice that this was laying out there, majority of these bills, not much going on there. So I would like to touch on a couple of bills that have had a little bit of movement. Most notably, following up on the budget report, SB 28 is currently in conference. So our budget bill is included in that. It is moving along just as the agency would like it to. There's no big outstanding issues there. So we have no concerns at this time with our budget as it's going through the process. SB 347, which is the commission bill, which abolishes the current commission and then reestablishes a new commissioner, changes the appointing powers. That bill is currently below the line on the House floor. Now, this means that it needs to become above the line before it can be passed out. If it's passed out, it will go to conference. If it manages to go out of conference, then it goes to governor's desk. So there's still some work that time for that bill to either become an issue that we might need to deal with or not deal with as seen fit by the secretaries. We have HB 2648, which is the Rules and Regs bill, which creates some definition changes. We have some concerns with the definition there. We did bring those concerns to the attention of the committees. It is currently pending enrollment with the governor. There is a potential discussion on if that bill applies to us, and if it comes to that point, we will have those discussions internally on how to address that. And then you have SB 417, which is the eminent domain bill. This bill was amended to narrow the scope of the secretary's powers for eminent domain. Most notably, it now gives the attorney general discretion on if they will proceed with eminent domain as recommended by the secretaries. And that bill is still in House Ag and Natural Resources. Most of these bills, if they've passed the first chamber, they are conferenceable, which means that they can be taken and put into other bills. But at this time, we don't see any movement on that. But there's plenty of time left. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Question: when bill's been stricken from the calendar, does it mean it's dead?
Correct.
Okay, so it would have to be reintroduced.
That is correct.
Okay.
How much time's left?
How much time's left? They go on vacation end of next week for 3 weeks. We're looking at May 2nd, I believe, day 90 for the legislative session.
So that's the deadline.
That's the deadline day, yeah. On the even years, they have a 90-day session.
For constituents that are interested and active and want to express an opinion either way, is it appropriate for them on 347 to be talking to anyone at this point or not? Regardless of what their stance is, that's one question. And then on the rules and regs, Bill, is there again any place there where they can or should express their opinion at this point in time, given the schedule and the process?
Sure. For both of those questions, anytime a constituent has any questions or concerns, they are more than welcome to voice those. They are speaking on behalf of their own interests and not on behalf of the agency per se. But it is your right and your duty to go ahead and speak out to the legislature. You can send it to legislators. You can send it to the governor's office. You can send it to me. But definitely, if they feel compelled to do so, they are more than welcome to. There's no further questions. If Brad, Secretary Lovelace has anything to follow up on.
I don't. And as always, appreciate your comments, Martin. And the system only works if people have inputs. It's the way it is for us here with our agency and the commission. It's the way the legislature works. So please get engaged, get involved, let your voice be heard. And with that,
thank you,
Mr. Chair. You want to come up here? You want me to come over there to you?
I don't care.
No, how about you come over here? Come over to the. All right. Well, this is a special day for us. And we want to take the opportunity to say thanks to Joe Lauber, who has been a great chairman, a great friend of the agency. A few prepared remarks. We have a couple things we'd like to present you with. But by way of history, Gerald Lauber started his service with the Department of Wildlife and Parks Commission way back in April 2005. Since then, he's been a steadfast voice of reason throughout his service to the natural resources of Kansas and its constituents. He has consistently responded with wisdom and good humor, which we've all enjoyed. And the agency is really in your debt because of that. He's always put the best interests of Kansans and of our natural resources ahead of his own. Gerald was born and raised in Woodson County down southeast Kansas. Gerald's family farm was right next door to the Woodson Wildlife Area. Gerald's passion for the outdoors has been fostered by the wildlife and habitats associated with the Cross Timbers ecoregion down there in Woodson County. He has frequently referenced, if you've been with him in commission meetings, he's frequently referenced his love for white-tailed deer, eastern wild turkey, wood ducks, and crappies. And he's avid at pursuing all those things. We are confident that he'll continue to enjoy pursuing those species long into the future. Under Chairman Lauber's tenure and support, we've had many notable achievements together with the department. Let me mention just a few. Cabins added to state parks. Innovative fishing regulations, which are always contentious, but Chairman Lauber and the commission has really supported allowing our fisheries professionals to use their best scientific judgment to greatly improve fish populations and angler satisfaction. We've made successful aquatic species reintroductions to areas where they were lost over time. The Becoming an Outdoor Woman program has seen remarkable growth and development. Development of the Kansas bird trails. Innovations and improvements to Kansas hunter education programs. Development of iWeHa, very successful. Bolstering of our aquatic invasive species management efforts. Increased access for our Hispanic and Latino constituents with translated publications and area signage. Improving the processes for distributing licenses and permits to our disabled veterans. And lastly, to the establishment of our newest state parks, Flint Hills Trail, Little Jerusalem, and most recently, Lehigh Portland. Those are just a few of the highlights that have all occurred during Chairman Lauber's tenure. In recognition for his 19 years of dedicated service, the Woodson Wildlife Area Habitat Unit number 12 down by Woodson State Park will be, or Woodson Wildlife Area, excuse me, will be renamed to the Gerald W. Lauber Wild Turkey Habitat Restoration Unit. And we're developing the plaque for that dedication right now. This is a 367-acre unit of predominantly blackjack and post oak woodland, what you're used to walking through. Staff are currently using prescribed fire and timber stand improvement to transition the unit to more of an oak savanna type ecosystem that it historically was. The increase in plant diversity greatly improves the area to benefit wild turkey nesting, brood, rearing, and roosting habitat. Gerald has been a pleasure to work with and a passionate advocate for the natural resource of Kansas. His presence on the commission will be missed, and we will find nothing more fitting than recognizing this new area as a testament to his dedication. So Gerald, we have a plaque for you. I'm going to shake your hand. So a beautiful plaque developed for Gerald, and we might have something else.
Gerald, to go along with the Woodson dedication under your name, Sheila and I handpicked this for you, thinking it looks just exactly like Woodson Wildlife Area. So we'd like to present you with this print as well, along with the dedication.
Thank you very much.
And we thank you for your service, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I don't have anything to say. It's an honor. I've enjoyed working with absolutely everybody here. It's an honor to work for this agency, and I've enjoyed it for many years. Time to go, but I've enjoyed it. So that's all I have.
Nadia wants a picture before you sit down.
In front of the podium, if you don't mind.
Oh,
The three of you guys.
Do you want the plaque?
Yeah, both would be great.
Sure.
Just so you know, too, Gerald, John Johnson came today too.
Yeah, I saw that. We never put the notes on who should get pay raises because Gerald voted for John Johnson every year. He's the manager of Woodson Wildlife Area.
1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thanks, Nadia.
Gerald, don't run off. John, he's not here. John started being a manager down at Woodson in 2011. Him and Gerald became friends pretty quick, and so this was John's idea of the area, and he's the one that had done the work, and so we're gonna get a picture.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I forgot my order. So with this, with your permission, we'll take a few minute break. We've got cake and drinks back there. Few minute break to enjoy those and visit with Chairman Lauber if you'd like. So maybe 10 minutes, do you think?
10 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Only 10 minutes.
It has.
North side.
Stay right there. Inventory of.
Okay, let's get ready to
Facilities
get back and
and-
take our seats.
And I will. You don't have a lack of people to call. Yeah, I called you last time. I call you, give you a head.
Yeah. It'd be very difficult, even in public education.
Well, what I heard.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is a general discussion, which will start with the trout program regulation. Brian.
Already here.
There.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Brian Sowards, Fisheries Division Director. I'm going to be a little less succinct than I normally am when we're talking about proposing some fishing regulations. For the benefit of the commission, our new secretary, new chair. So I want to give a little bit more information about the program and the evaluation of the program that we did in 2023. So a little bit about the program. We've started stocking trout since 1994. It is a winter fishing opportunity, historically from November 1st. It actually used to be before that, I think October 15th, but November 1st through April 15th typically provides shoreline and bank anglers additional opportunities during the winter to get outdoors and do something and participate in fishing. So it is a put and take fishery. Kansas surface waters get too warm in the late spring and early summer for trout to survive in most cases, and they will typically reach 100% mortality about 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So it is a put and take fishery. We want and we encourage anglers to take them because they're not going to survive the summer. We typically sell about 10 to 12,500 trout permits each year at $12 a permit. And that's relatively stable. And why we're having this conversation about trout program evaluation is directly related to an increase in cost. Very significant increases in 2023 when compared to 2022. And Wildlife and Parks, despite having 4 fish hatcheries, does not produce our own rainbow trout. We go to commercial vendors, put out for bid, and get trout stocked from commercial sources. Right now, we have 3 contracts. One's in a Nebraska vendor, Colorado and Missouri are producing our trout. So that's why cost is very important to us. This comes directly out of the Wildlife Fee Fund budget. And for some vendors, I can show you that again. $1.57 is what one fish cost in 2011. It's now up to $3.53 per fish. And some vendors, it's as much as $4.50 per fish. So significant costs. So in the light blue there, you can see the number of trout stocked over time from 2011 to 2023. And the red bar shows the cost of the trout program. So you can see in 2016, we saw a large drop in the number of trout stocked. That was the last big increase in the commodity costs for trout. And so we responded by decreasing the amount of trout stocked. Simple solution, right? Well, here we are again with another increase in cost, and we can't just simply reduce the amount of trout stocked, or the program itself will kind of dwindle. And it won't reach the constituents in the way that we want it to. So we're trying to look for a unique way of approaching the trout program, which is the reason for the evaluation. Another graph here in the light blue shows the license revenue. So that 10 to 12,000 permits sold every year gets us about $120,000 to $140,000 in revenue every year. Very, very stable. But the cost of the program, again, is going up. Despite the revenue not. So again, an impetus for doing this trout program evaluation. Okay, so getting into the evaluation a little bit, the goal is to help. We want to talk to anglers. We want to get that social aspect as well as the fiscal aspect to help direct the program forward and form palatable solutions. Can't really see that very well, but we want to see where they're fishing, what time of the season they like to fish. As I mentioned, November 1 to April 15th was the original season. And we want to kind of pinpoint within that, where's the most activity occurring. The size of trout people like to catching versus harvesting. So we're going to get some of that information. We did in-person interviews. Susan Steffen, our human dimension specialist and social scientist in the Emporia office, along with Jeff Conley, our trout program coordinator, kind of helped create a survey. And then our goal was 400 interviews last February. And so the field staff kind of rallied and went to work, went out to trout locations to get these interviews done. And we ended up with over 500 in-person interviews, and you can see some of those locations. We have approximately 30 locations across the state that we stock trout in. And you can see with the surveys, we did a pretty good job peppering across the state for input from anglers. Okay. So one of the questions we asked, are you fishing for trout today? And it's interesting, we're going to trout fishing locations during the trout season. It was February, and there was still about 20% that were fishing for something else, like crappie, catfish, or anything else. And the top preferred species that these anglers were mentioning were catfish, black bass, and crappie. Very common to what we see in our licensed angler survey from all our constituents. Throughout the year, black bass, crappie, and catfish are usually towards the top. Even though they're mostly specifically targeting trout, they prefer other things. A heck of a time with this. Okay, and again, making that same point from before, we asked them, compared to other types of fishing, how important is trout fishing to you? 49% said it was important or one of the most important, and 51% said it's no more important than anything else or less important. So I think that's interesting. You're talking to trout anglers, half of them are like, yeah, it's important to me and it's not really important to me, but I'm out. I think if you went out this time of year and talked to walleye anglers, you probably wouldn't get a 50-50 response. It'd be a lot more, this is the most important thing to me. So this is something we're learning from the survey. In terms of the time during the trout season that's most popular for fishing participation, November was. I think that's because, that's the start of the season. Everybody gets a little amped up, but typically January, February, March is where the most activity occurs. The top motivations, similar to our anglers across the state, our top motivations are getting outdoors, an opportunity to go fishing. To me, that's a fairly low bar. Where you see harvesting fish is only 3%. Only 3% of people said that's their biggest motivation or the thing that was most important to them. So, okay, so for recommendations, the changes we make are likely to minimally impact trout anglers. That's not to say that this activity is not important or it doesn't add to their experience, but it kind of highlights that this is an opportunistic fishery, just an extra program that adds to their experiences throughout the year. And 92%, we also asked them, hey, if we didn't have the trout program anymore, would you still buy a fishing license? And we thought, they'd arbitrarily say, no, I would. Sure, we kept going. So I felt like they were fairly honest. 92% said, yeah, I'll still buy a license. So, and catching trout was more important to them than harvesting trout, which is a trend we're seeing for a lot of different species in the state. So here's some stuff we did last year in response to the survey, in response to, we got to do something because of these increased costs. We truncated the stockings. Instead of 5 or 6 stockings from November 1 through April 15, we cut the season down to December 1 to March 31. Not in regulation, that's what we're going to ask for here today, but we cut the stockings down to that shorter time frame, and we only did 3 stockings. So one in December, one in February, one in March. And that got our budget down from about 280,000 to 200,000. So an $80,000 reduction in trout purchased. And we did maintain the creel limit of 5 per day. I know a lot of folks would say to this, well, if trout's a concern from a cost perspective, why don't you go to a 2 per day or 3 per day creel limit? But like a lot of things I'll talk to you guys about crappie in the past, very few trout anglers catch their 5 per day limit. But we wanted those that where harvest was important, we wanted to maintain a high creel limit so that those few anglers that do harvest their limit are getting what they want out of the program. The wild card to this whole evaluation is that we, in response to making what we felt was a dramatic cut to the program, we wanted to work with Brody Latham, he is our marketing program essentially, to market the trout program. So that maybe we'd be able to at least break even on trout. We wouldn't lose so many trout permit holders based on the cuts. You can't see all this, but this is basically a lot of marketing wizardry. But he did some Instagram and Facebook targeted marketing. He looked at folks that had a fishing license but did not have a trout permit. And he reached over 100,000 individuals 18 or 19 times. So I'm sure they got really annoyed by the end. Well, the jury's still out on this 2023-2024 year in terms of permit holders versus the last year. But Brody assures me from December 1 through March 18th, we saw a 48% increase in our trout permit sales. That's after an $80,000 reduction in the program. So I think some of these changes we made and the marketing was a huge help for us. So for future workshop sessions, the regulations that we're looking for are an official change to the trout season in 1/15/25-14. We're looking to officially go to December 1 through March 31st, and then that'll be on all our signage and everything. This past year, we truncated the stockings to that time frame, but the legal season was still the November 1 through April 15. So we're looking to change the trout season. And then in 1/15/2-1, dealing with our fees, we want to increase the cost of the trout permit from $12 to $17.50. And with the $2.50 processing fee, that would be an even $20. So during the survey, there were a lot of respondents that mentioned they would be willing to pay more for trout. Usually it was in the $20 to $30 range that they said they'd be willing to pay. But just to give you an idea of what that would get you, here's the cost of a 5-fish creel limit of trout based on those prices, those costs I told you for individual trout. So in 2011, taking home 5 fish was the equivalent of $785. And today, 2023, a 5-fish creel limit is right around that $17.50, $17.65. So they're expensive, and that $17.50 permit essentially buys you 5 fish, but you can have 5 fish daily throughout the season. So yeah, just to give you an idea what that permit would go towards. That's all I have.
Brian, did you, I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
In that survey, those results where people say they'd pay more, what percentage did you get percentages out of that? What percentage of those folks?
No, it actually was not an official question. I don't think, was it, John? I think it was.
Survey?
Was what would you be willing to pay an official question, or was that anecdotal?
Well, yeah, they were open-ended statements, I think is where all that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I couldn't get that for you.
Okay. As the trout producers, have those folks, has that been reduced? I understand locally from where I'm from that there used to be a few trout producers, and now that's been reduced down.
I don't know what it looked like 10 years ago I do, but 20, 30 years ago I don't. But that is a huge problem, is the supply is so reduced And, you know, Wyandotte County's going out for bids. We're going out for bids. Oklahoma's reaching out for bids. But there's just only so many people that supply this, that supply trout. So.
Yeah. Okay.
When was the last time there was an increase in that permit cost?
I don't even know. So we started in 94. I'm sure it was increased maybe along with the 2016 package where we increased a lot of things at the time.
It's been a substantial amount of time.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
what size are the fish that you're stocking, most of them?
They're 1.7 fish per pound. So that's almost a 3/4 pound fish.
How much do they gain in, or do they in that? That one picture was a pretty nice fish.
They typically don't gain anything.
Okay.
They don't grow a whole lot once they're stocked. That's all. So that big fish, we also in the contract, I think 5% of the fish is required to be a larger fish.
Okay.
I don't remember how big, but we're stocking 2 to 4 pound fish as 5% of the load. But most of them are that 3/4 pound.
Are the age requirements for the permits the same as a regular fishing license?
The age requirement is 16 and above. We also have a youth trout permit for those less than 16. We don't like charging permits for those less than 16, but it was in response to the cost of the program.
Sure.
And that one's $450.
That's
So
understandable.
we're not looking to change that for youth permit.
Okay.
How many sites do you stock across the state? Is it 17? Is that right?
Well, it's around 30 right now. Some go dry, some have particular issues, but
Yeah, some go dry. For Lake Henry there by Clinton,
Mhm.
I get a few guys when I talk to the trout fishing out of Wyandotte this year were saying, you know, it goes pretty quick there. Are they stocked the same everywhere with the amounts per acre, or is because it goes pretty quick at Henry, I guess is what I'm saying.
that's a good question. I think a lot of it was based on catch rates from 20, 30 years ago because some had higher catch rates than others. So we'd stock more here, more there. So there's differences in like number per acre that are stocked based on some old information on catch rates. They probably did better at Clinton a few years ago, but since we had that big reduction in numbers in 2016 and we reduced it again this year, I bet they go pretty quick.
Yeah, they said he went back the second time and did nowhere near
Yeah.
the first time.
Yeah.
Which was just a few days later.
Mhm.
So,
Any other questions for Brian?
yeah, I've got a question. What's the program? What's the end goal of the program? What's our objective other than to introduce people to another opportunity? But if it continues to be a net negative fiscally, will you continue the program?
Yeah, I think we'll have to have that conversation. I think right now we stop the bleeding for a little bit fiscally. We're doing some really good marketing. We've cut the season, so it's still a similar amount of trout, just in a truncated season. But if that trend continues, we'll have to have some hard conversations. The current goal right now is just to provide an additional opportunity in the winter for bank anglers to get out and enjoy the resource.
Is there any indirect benefit to other areas of the department by getting those people out, or to the communities, or any other way to measure success?
Yeah, I mean, typically we used to not have very many people fish in the wintertime. I mean, with live scope, we have a lot more people fishing for crappie on the reservoirs. And then with trout, I think it's a way to kind of boost that economic impact that you see from angling in general, just during a season that typically didn't have much in the past. And then you still got all the hunters out during that time of year too.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Ryan, last question. Do you, when a trout dies, maybe John, you can up on this. When a trout dies in the water, do they sink or do they float? I'm just curious about that. I'm wondering what kind of return we're getting locally.
Yeah.
You know, for as much as I think we dumped 15,000, but
Yeah.
you know, if they die and they sink.
Well, it's both good and bad. They do sink, typically, John, in your experience, right? And that's both good and bad. It's good so that if there's a bunch that die, the anglers don't see it. But it's also it's also bad because we don't really get a great idea of
Right.
what we lost.
That's what I was getting at. You know, if you're spending X amount of money on
Yeah.
it, what are you getting in return for that? We don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now you
There's-
can go out in late April, early May, some years and electrofish. And if you start seeing a bunch of trout coming up, that means anglers didn't get them and you're about to lose them.
Yeah.
So that would be one way to evaluate it if you wanted to.
Yeah, ours last till about third week of June, and then that's it.
Oh,
But they get condensed down to, you know, it's from the heat from
Pretty good.
above and the oxygen drives them into one little area.
mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's like fishing in a bucket right there, if you know where that area
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
After the season is over, those are just free catch, no permit required.
Yeah. At almost all locations, that is the case. So after March 31st, there will be fair game with or without a permit. Yes. Yep.
Brian, real quickly, would you mind giving an update on the walleye egg collection?
Yeah. Thanks, Stuart. I just wanted to give a positive note. This time of year is when our walleye are spawning across the state. This year we are collecting, eggs and milk from walleye at Hillsdale, Wilson, and El Dorado. Our field staff are out there right now, and they're out there every day for the next week or so, collecting those, sending them to our Pratt and Milford hatcheries to fertilize, and they'll hatch out in about 11 to 14 days. And then we'll either stock them out as freshly hatched fry, or we'll put them in our hatchery ponds to grow up to approximately 1.5, 2 inches to stock as larger fish in late May, early June. Typically what we'll get from this effort daily at a reservoir, like Hillsdale, for example, is maybe 1 to 3 million eggs a day on average. And so we kind of trickle throughout the season and try to reach a 50 to 80 million egg goal. But at Wilson just yesterday, we got 11 million eggs in one day. So Wilson's doing really well right now. So just wanted to share that with the group.
Same effort for Sauger and Sauger.
Yeah, Sauger we typically do at Perry, just our far eastern reservoirs. A handful of them have Sauger, which is a smaller, more riverine, dark blotchy, pursed walleye, essentially. And then we'll mix those two together. We'll take the milk from a Sauger and the eggs from a walleye, and make our Saugai. That's our big Saugai program, which is getting more important every year. We're stocking more Saugai, more lakes every year. So. Yep.
Okay. Trevor?
Trevor's online. He's gonna.
Okay. Let's go ahead.
All right, can everybody hear me? Let me share my screen here. All right, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Great. So my name is Trevor Starks. I'm the Aquatic Species Recovery Coordinator for the it's a relatively new program here at Ecological Services. And I'm grateful to share a little bit about our program, which has been around for about a year now, a little bit about the origins, background of the program, what we've done in the last year, and give you a little sneak peek of what we have planned for the upcoming years. So this first slide, I've got a bar chart that shows you the number of species that have been listed under the Endangered Species Act from 1985 to 2020. And as you can see, there's a lot more gray on that graph than there is orange, meaning a lot more species were being listed than removed from the list. When you total those up, you're left with about 1,300 species that have been added to the list, and only 64 of those being delisted. And even a smaller subsection, 43 of those were actually delisted due to recovery of the species. The others being species that either went extinct or that further data collection showed that the initial listing wasn't exactly warranted. So when you look at those species that have been delisted, they kind of come into two specific categories. The first category is kind of charismatic, larger bodied vertebrates like the American alligator, humpback whale, and I think a lot of folks are knowledgeable about the recovery of the bald eagle. And then the other class of species or group of species are smaller bodied vertebrate or invertebrates with very, very localized endemic ranges. So in the case of the Oregon chub and the borax lake chub that I've pictured here, they have very, very small endemic ranges that conservation agencies can pour resources into to help recover the species. The gap between those two groups are smaller vertebrates or invertebrates with large ranges that don't typically get as much attention when it comes to recovery. And a lot of state conservation agencies are kind of stepping up to fill the gap and address conservation concerns with those species. A state agency that gets highlighted a lot for this is the state of Alabama. So pictured here is the Alabama Aquatic Biodiversity Center. It's the largest center of its kind, or the largest facility of its kind in the United States. And they raise a lot of federally listed and state listed freshwater mussel species that they raise to stock across the state to help recover those populations and get them delisted. A lot of states have kind of joined these similar efforts. North Carolina has a program, Virginia has a program, state of Colorado, and I'm sure there's more, and obviously state of Kansas. So the general goals of our program and others like it are to reintroduce species into historic habitats where they've been extirpated, and we believe that the conditions there have improved enough to conditions have improved in those areas that populations could survive, and we could establish viable breeding populations with a final goal of recovering, delisting, and deregulating those populations. And in the cases of a state listed species, maybe prevent listing in the first place. So obviously, when we're dealing with any kind of federal trust species, there are challenges, as the Fish and Wildlife Service is the primary agency tasked with managing those species. And so if you'll excuse me, I'm just going to read a quick section from section 9 of the ESA, which is kind of the hammer of the Endangered Species Act in terms of regulatory burden. It states that with respect to any endangered species, it is unlawful for any person subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S. to take any such species. You'll hear the word take used a lot when discussing the Endangered Species Act, and that is defined in that section as harassing, harming, pursuing, hunting, shooting, wounding, killing, trapping, capturing, or collecting or attempting to engage in any of that conduct. So when I typically think about this section, I'm really thinking about industry, oil spills, anything that would directly harm a listed species. But the kicker is that it also applies to conservation measures. So even if KDWP has the best intentions in mind, doing a conservation effort or a habitat management project or anything like that, if it leads to death of a listed species, we've technically violated the ESA. So the way we typically address that is through Section 6 of the Endangered Species Act. This section dictates that the Fish and Wildlife Service cooperate with state conservation agencies on work with listed species. So like if Ryan Waters' biosurvey crew is out sampling fish, or Victoria's terrestrial survey group is out collecting data on herps or small mammals, and they come across a listed species, they actually, take location information, look at the condition of the animal, maybe take some measurements, and then let it go. And then at the end of every year, we actually fill out a Section 6 report that we give to the service. So we're able to do our jobs while the Fish and Wildlife Service gets updated species distribution information to help make management decisions. However, this does not provide any protections for private landowners that want to work with threatened and endangered species. And anyone who's familiar with how much land is private versus public in the state is probably aware of why this is a problem. And to illustrate that, I'm going to go back to the state of Alabama that I discussed in a previous slide. So about 7% of land is publicly held in the state of Alabama, which ranks about 38th in the nation. Within that 7%, about 4,000 river miles, there's about 4,000 river miles of publicly accessible waters in 63 different water bodies. So that means that if the state of Alabama wants to start recovering a mussel species, they have a lot of public access to work with where they don't need any additional protections. Contrast that with the state of Kansas, where about 2% of land is publicly held, which ranks next to last in the nation. And within that, we have about 700 river miles of public waters across the Kansas, the Ark, and the Missouri rivers. However, about 200 river miles of that per year is typically dry. So we don't have as much public land to work with. And obviously, if we want to do any work with some of these species, we're going to have to partner with private landowners. So that's where the Kansas Aquatic Species Conservation Agreement steps into play. So this was a joint effort created by an ICF, which is a consulting firm, Ecological Services staff here at KDWP, and the Fish and Wildlife Service. So this was published in the Federal Register in 2021, and it's the first document of its kind in the nation. Since this was passed, North Carolina has a similar agreement. And what this agreement essentially allows us to do is to pursue reintroduction activities with listed species, but it also provides legal protections to private landowners who want to partner with KDWP in those efforts. Typically, when you've seen agreements like this in the past, they're typically small areas or maybe only 1 to 2 species. This agreement actually allows us to work with, after this newest, our last amendment gets passed, will be 21 species. So 10 freshwater mussel species, 10 fish species, and then 1 reptile being the alligator snapping turtle. And we can pursue those efforts across the entire state. So to kind of get into how this document works, the first step is the enhancement of survival permit. So this document provides contains an enhancement of survival permit, which is otherwise referred to as a 10A 1A permit. This allows KDWP to work with listed species as long as we're providing what's referred to as a net conservation benefit for the species. So the way I like to highlight that is if we, for example, wanted to stock 100 listed mussels at a site and 5 of those died while we transported them or during the stocking effort, we've technically violated Section 9 of the ESA. But because the other 95 were stocked there to reestablish a breeding population, we've provided a net conservation benefit, and we're able, that take is permissible under that permit. But through this conservation agreement, we're able to pass those protections on to the private landowner through signing of what's known as a certificate of inclusion. So essentially, if a landowner is interested, we sign them up under a landowner agreement, and they are covered for take of listed species if they allow us to stock there. So to kind of break down what each entity is getting out of this agreement, I have our private landowner here on the left and Kansas Parks on the right. Obviously, this is a voluntary enrollment. We're not going to be forcing anyone to partake in this program. But the landowner who does want to participate and signs an agreement is covered for incidental take of basically any legal land use activity that is occurring on their property. So when we think of legal land use in private land in the state of Kansas, you know, the 2 big ones we're talking about are farming and ranching, but that also covers other non-farming and ranching activities. Think about logging or maybe building a building or any kind of land activity going on there. We can sign that up on the agreement, and they're covered for any incidental take that may involve take of a listed species resulting from those legal land use practices. The landowner is not required to enact any additional measures, and there are very flexible agreement provisions that I'll detail in the next couple slides. In return, Kansas Parks is allowed to stock animals. So we're allowed to access the property to stock animals, access the property to survey or monitor the status of those populations to see if they're persisting at the site and also if they're reproducing. And this also helps alleviate regulatory burden during listing decisions. So sometimes if the Fish and Wildlife Service are considering listing a species and are considering a critical habitat designation, if they know that a state is already taking proactive conservation efforts with that species, they'll forego that regulatory burden on the state to allow us to continue those activities. Some other additional provisions. The landowner is not held for anything random or stochastic. Think about like drought, disease. If there's a wildfire and we have a coal ash flow down the river and it ends up killing a mussel stocking site, the landowner is not going to be held liable for that. Any of the terms in that can be in the agreement can be amended. So when we think about land use, if we have a landowner that wants to do something different on their property that wasn't in the initial agreement, we can amend it very easily. We can change scheduling. Obviously, we're not going to access the site without contacting the landowner, and we can change that schedule around, and we can add or remove species from the agreements. The landowner can terminate an agreement at any time, but they do need to provide KDWP the opportunity to relocate any species we may have stocked there within 60 days. So we have the agreement in place, and the next step is where are we going to get animals? So some of you may be familiar with the Kansas Aquatic Biodiversity Center, which was a building constructed in 2018 at our Farlington hatchery in southeast Kansas. So that facility, if you look there at the picture in the middle, is the wet lab facility along with its supply pond there. And this facility was constructed with the express intent of propagating animals, imperiled animals to stock in waters across Kansas. So since then, they've got several propagation systems for both fish and mussels at that site. They've raised about 25,000 mussels to date and about 2,500 fish. So I'm going to switch gears and talk about a couple species that we worked with in the last year. The first being the plains minnow. So this is a state listed species. It was listed as threatened in 2003. If you look at the map there, it essentially occurred in every plains stream that we had in the state. All of those red areas now are areas where the species has since disappeared, and the only persisting populations we have that we can reliably sample are in the Salt Fork of the Arkansas River as well as the Cimarron River. But we believe that there's some areas that have improved to the degree that we think we could reestablish some populations. So in the spring of 2022, Ecological Services staff collected 154 adult plains minnows from the Salt Fork of the Arkansas River. And from those adults, the KBC staff were able to raise about 2,500 age-0 plains minnows that were then released on the Arkansas River at public access at Oxford, Kansas. And we have future stockings planned in the Arkansas River watershed. But what's interesting, in the following spring, the stream survey crew actually was sampling the Arkansas River below Lincoln Street Dam, and we're doing a seine haul below the railroad bridge there, which is right downstream of the dam, if you're familiar, and actually collected 4 adult plains minnow. And this species has not occurred in that fragment of river for the last 15 years. And based on that fact and the size of these individuals, we know that they were from that stocking. So while this doesn't mean that there's a reproducing population there, we do know that they can persist, and that gives us some hope that maybe we could establish a population there and maybe in some other segments. Another species we worked with in the last year is the Neosho mucket. So this is a freshwater mussel species. It was listed as endangered at the state level in '93, and then listed as federally endangered in 2013. So coincidentally, the Fish and Wildlife Service National Hatchery at Neosho, Missouri, actually had a bunch of Neosho mucket progeny on hand whose parents had actually originated in Kansas, and they contacted us about a potential stocking location for all these mussels that they had on hand. And we used that as an opportunity to sign our first landowner agreements under the program. So we signed up 2 landowners under the program. And the general strategy was to release half the mussels last year, and then we will do a qualitative survey to document persistence of the species. And if they're still persisting, made it through the winter, we'll stock the other half on site. We're also pursuing a recovery permit from the Fish and Wildlife Service. So if you want to pursue propagating a listed species at a state hatchery, you have to have a recovery permit from the service to do so. We've submitted our application, and we're hoping to get that in place so we can start raising Neosho muckets to repopulate the Neosho River and starting in 2025. So some future efforts, we're obviously going to be working with those species. We also brought in some broodstock of Washita kidney shell, which is the species listed there or shown there in the bottom center of the picture. It's a state threatened species, and we've brought in some broodstock at the KBC to help repopulate essentially the entire Neosho watershed where they've disappeared. The only populations are left that are in that watershed are in the spring. And then we have a couple projects coming up with university staff at Missouri State University with an alligator snapping turtle tracking project, as well as a red spot chub reintroduction project with Pitt State University. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Any questions for Trevor?
Mr. Chair, I might ask him one. So Trevor, talk about, we understand the protections for the landowners that have agreed to put those critters on their property, their section of stream. What happens when they expand, which we hope they do? Are there any protections that you can offer to neighbors where they might expand onto?
Yes, so we do have a neighboring landowner agreement under the program. And so if a neighboring landowner wants any sort of similar protections, but doesn't necessarily want to allow a stocking or allow KDWP staff on their property, we do have a shorter version of the agreement that a neighboring landowner can sign.
Okay. All right, any other questions? Well, thank you, Trevor.
Thank you.
Now we're moving on to the workshop session. Matt, Antelope 25 series.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, this is 115.25.7 Antelope open season bag limit and permits. I presented this regulation in November and January, and we had no changes to recommend, but we're waiting on the completion of aerial surveys in the 2 southern units to determine whether to make any changes to permit allocations. At this point, we're going to propose to leave the permit allocations the same as they were last year, which means we're not recommending any changes to this regulation. So with that, unless the commission has questions or anything to add, we won't bring this regulation forth again in this regulatory session.
Does anybody have anything to add? Okay.
Okay, moving on to elk then, KAR 115.25.8. We have one change to recommend with this regulation. The elk are doing really well on and around Fort Riley, as I mentioned in the past, and we've had some damage issues cropping up due to the number of elk up there lately. And so we've been visiting with Fort Riley staff about ways to increase harvest. One of the concerns about just increasing permit allocations is that, of course, Fort Riley is a limited space, even though it's fairly big. And we're a little bit concerned about getting too much hunting pressure on the fort itself, in that any elk permits are once in a lifetime permits. And so we sort of want a high quality hunt associated with that. And so we were looking for some ideas to increase harvest without creating excessive pressure. And what we came up with that we'd like to recommend today is that we establish an additional firearm season on Fort Riley from January 1 through 31. And so right now, the Fort Riley season ends December 31st, and then no elk hunters are allowed on after that. We would establish this this season throughout the month of January. It would be open to all unfilled Fort Riley elk permit holders. So they would basically be given an extra month if they were unsuccessful during the existing seasons. And it's hoped that this would increase harvest by a few animals and also just generally create a little bit more flexibility in dealing with some of the issues that are, like I say, they're sort of starting to crop up a little bit with some bigger herds being off of the fort, and that extra month allowing people can address some of those issues on the fort if the elk are coming off and then going back on. So anyway, that's what we're looking at. We are not proposing any change to the permit allocations, which is 12 any elk and 18 antlerless elk, and durable season dates are now established in this regulation. And so we won't have any change to those things. And this is the third time this regulation has been presented. And so I think with approval, we would be looking to move it into the promulgation process. And then the last thing I would mention is at the last commission meeting, Commissioner Sill asked about the number of non-resident tenant permits that are issued for the elk. And I thought I knew what that was at the time, but I didn't want to guess. I should have it. It is right what I thought it was, which is about 27 per year, 27 non-resident tenant permits per year that we're selling. And that's over an average over the past 3 seasons, but that's out of a total of about 180 elk permits. So about 15% of our current elk permit sales are to non-resident tenants. And so with that, I'll turn this back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Matt?
What's the success rate on Fort Riley?
For any elk permit holders, it's usually over 75%. And for antlerless elk permit holders, it's closer to 50 most years. The antlerless elk permit holders are limited to one of the so 1/3 of them hunt each month of the October, November, December season, whereas the any elk hunters can hunt all 3 of those months.
Okay, and the rationale for that extended season being just the unsuccessful hunters versus providing an opportunity for a separate set of hunters?
We didn't want to, we were cognizant of the amount of pressure on there. And so we could have issued more any elk permits or added another antlerless elk permit to each month. And we may do that at some point, but right now we would rather keep hunting pressure a little bit lower, keep the number of elk hunters on the fort at any given time a little bit lower, and hope that the hunters that are there can achieve a little bit higher success rate by giving them a little bit more time. Particularly the antlerless elk hunters have some ground, 50% success. A number of them are usually looking for places to hunt off of the fort if they can get access on private land. The elk season is ongoing, and so there are antlerless elk. Well, there are hunters still willing to hunt if they were able to.
Okay, I guess I'm still misunderstanding something. Forgive me. So hunting pressure to me means people all at one time. But if you add this additional date and it's a different group of hunters, you don't necessarily have more people at one time. You're not increasing the allocation during those initial seasons. It's an extra piece. So that would not necessarily increase pressure at the same time as those other seasons.
Well, we didn't consider issuing separate permits just for the January season, if I'm following you there.
Yeah, that's kind of my question.
Okay, yeah, we weren't considering that. The fort has a lot of intermittent restrictions and limitations on where you can hunt and stuff like that, which is why we during that 3-month period don't have equipment restrictions. It's firearm, and so they can use any equipment type, is because a lot of the areas may be closed intermittently. Some years you might, during the month of October, some of the main areas the elk are may be closed entirely to training and stuff like that, or they may be closed to firearm hunting, and so only archery hunters would be allowed into those key units, even though the permit would have allowed for firearms use. So there are the additional complications related to the fort, I think.
That makes good sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Matt? Okay.
All right, thank you.
We need to vote for that.
On the promulgation, is that what you're asking? If you need to vote on whether it can go?
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, unless there's objections by the commission, we'll move that to promulgation.
Fair enough.
All right.
I'm back again. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, today in the workshop, I want to talk about KR 115-25-9A, which is our deer seasons and bag limits on our military facilities in Kansas. We typically bring this regulation to public hearing in June, and the later period of this is because on these military facilities, they may have changes like we just talked about with elk due to training missions. And so we delay the dates as long as possible to try to accommodate changes and still provide an opportunity for hunting at those facilities. And so typically these facilities are under can hunt under the statewide regulations, statewide seasons, but then they request some additional or some changes from that. And so for Fort Riley, you know, in addition to the pre-antlerless season in October, they're also requesting some additional opportunity for antlerless white-tailed deer firearms hunting from November 29th to December 1st. And then they would like to adjust their open firearm season to December 14th through December 22nd. And then also allow 5 additional antlerless white-tailed deer permits in the Fort Riley subunit 8A. That brings us to Fort Leavenworth, where they want to adjust their open firearms season dates to November 16th and 17th, November 23rd and 24th, November 28th through December 1st, and December 7th and December 8th, and then December 14th and December 15th. So it's the same number of days, just adjusted on the calendar when they occur. They also want to be included as part of the long extended antlerless season in January. So January 1st through January 19th. And to have the extended archery season that occurs in Unit 19. So January 20th to the 31st would be an additional archery opportunity for antlerless white-tailed deer. The Smoky Hill subunit, their open dates are for firearm season that they'd like are December 4th to December 15th. Smoky Hills typically followed the statewide seasons, and that's what this does. And then they want to be able to harvest up to the 5 additional antlerless permits available. And again, those differences are just to accommodate our armed forces needs for training, but then to provide that additional opportunity to hunt deer on those subunits. With that, I would take questions.
Any questions for Levi on this? Okay, go on to the next one.
All right. The next one is our the carcass movement regulation, which we've been discussing for a while. You should have a copy of or a draft of the potential regulation language. And it looks very similar to what we had in the briefing book for a while. We did need to define some of the terms we use. So in that case, you know, from the legal standpoint, we need to define what a carcass is. That's not defined in regulation. And then also what a wild cervid is. And when we did that, because the Department of Ag already has a definition of what a captive cervid is, we worked with their definition to make sure that we didn't cause any unintentional overlap in what we're calling a wild cervid versus what they call a captive, to have that continuity amongst regulations in the state. After that, it's basically very similar to what we talked about. We did discuss a 30-mile buffer around units, about being able to move carcasses outside of a unit. And after quite a bit of talk with law enforcement staff, they never saw that as a workable option. They just could not see how they could enforce that very well. So we've stricken that, and felt that the large list of exempt parts that can be moved helps make up for that. And some of the notable changes from what we've got is such as the hides, which before we said it had to have the excess flesh removed. Now it's just the hides have to not, can be attached to a carcass just as long as the head and spine are not attached, which is the parts we're mostly concerned about. So, and again, even with those exceptions, they still have to maintain their proof of sex as required in KR 115-4-2, which there are several options. You can, with quarters, you can leave part of the hide attached. With the genitals, external genitals left on to see. Or you can use the harvest reporting through the app to maintain your proof of sex. And then at that point, if you wanted to grind it in hamburger out in the field, you could, if you checked it in that way. So with that, I will take questions over this draft of the language.
Is the 30-mile limit in or out?
It's out. We just could not find a way to make it enforceable from our law enforcement staff.
What about somebody that wants to take their skull home and do their own European mount?
So they could potentially clean it at the site. Some states have asked folks to power wash them to remove the brain matter out of it. Some folks have potentially boiled it on site. So it's tougher if you're just want to throw it in the truck and go. But we're also trying to prevent that, especially brain matter from being distributed.
Any other questions for Levi?
Yeah, 3K, the 72-hour part of that, why wouldn't that apply to F and G and H and others? What's the purpose for that?
Are they, so in that case, it's going to a taxidermist. If somebody's done that much work, they've still maintained the problematic materials in that, yes. With the head and the cape, with the 6 inches of neck. But if somebody takes the trouble to, cape it out and leave it attached, they're taking it to a taxidermist to be processed and dealt with. In some cases, it's what happens to the waste afterwards that's potentially the problem.
I guess that's the one piece I struggle with is the difference between it's okay if the taxidermist makes the European mount, but I can't do it myself.
So the difficulty with this regulation is, can we, is it regulate the movement, or do you regulate what you do at the waste? And that's the problem. And generally the taxidermist is likely to have better waste disposable too. And it's also a concession to taxidermists in this case too, to deal with this.
That taxidermist could be anywhere, right? So you've got 72 hours where a contaminated part of the animal could be moved all over the place. So why wouldn't you have that same type of exclusion, if that's what you want to call it, to say, for example, F, unclean skulls. You could have those for 72 hours.
Well, and if it was going to a taxidermist in that case, yeah, it would fit under that. But again, it's what do you do? And generally with this regulation, it's much more designed to change people's behavior than anything else. So, which it's in discussions with several states about how they did it. I can go back to talk with Dan about including that, those in those cases too.
I'm not sure I'm suggesting it. I'm just trying to reconcile.
Yeah.
It seems like when we do this, we do need to do a lot of effective public education about best practices too.
Yes.
Because there's plenty of us that still want to butcher our own and do things, and yet we don't want to be contributors to the problem.
Yeah.
So I think public education is going to be critical here because this is a change for some of us. It's going to be pretty significant.
And that's been in our discussions too, what educational aspect of this that we have to pursue. Just as a very bare minimum, we've already discussed, the need of putting together, a video on how to do like the gutless dressing method and what some of this what different exceptions actually mean, what would classified as okay, what would not be. And that's our law enforcement staff played a big role in identifying that kind of stuff. from their standpoint.
I have one other question I'm almost afraid to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What is a hunter looking at as far as a penalty for violating this?
I am the wrong person to answer that question. So it's
Sorry, Colonel Kaiser.
Chairman Lawler, Commissioners, Colonel Kaiser, Law Enforcement Division. I don't have an answer to your question. I wasn't in the meeting as one of my staff, and so as far as penalties, that's not even discussed, has it, Levi?
we've kicked around a little bit, but it's such a different regulation we've looked at before. In some cases, we're not quite sure how that all fits. So that's why this is still just the draft and not being pushed more so too, because that's still there. And in looking at what other states propose, it's kind of all over the place. And there's, a fair amount of officer discretion as far as how they handle the cases too.
It's too new for us. We don't know at this point. So.
With that said, who is going to monitor the taxidermist? I mean, the regulations are clear or somewhat clear, but the training or the certifications that a taxidermist receives, how are they going to be updating their licensing or whatever to make sure that they're doing things properly?
Well, and since we don't actually regulate taxidermists as an agency, it would be up to them in that case. With that, it's more of the ability of officers to be able to follow up too in that case. And so, and some states have different systems and how they do it. And so this was a look at what other states did and try to take what's been done and understanding why certain things were done in different places and looking at what we have the ability to handle here. So, but addressing the need of, carcass movement concerns.
I guess that kind of addresses the question with regards to why can't a person that knows what they're supposed to do it, and a taxidermist not being held responsible for their actions. I guess that's how is that fair, I guess. So that's the question.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tom?
Thank you, Chair, members of the commission, visiting and viewing public. As you're aware, regulations for doves, cranes, snipe, rails, woodcock, and crows must adhere to federal frameworks similar to the process for waterfowl seasons. However, unlike waterfowl, stability in the federal frameworks allow us to include webless migratory game bird seasons and limits and permanent regulations. For the 2024-25 season, there are no changes in the federal frameworks for webless species. Staff are proposing no changes to the webless migratory game bird season's dates, bag limits, possessions, and a summary of the 2024-25 seasons and bag limits are under regulations is provided in the briefing book. Unless there's commission instructions, this would terminate the process for the annual seeding setting process for webless migratory game birds. And with that, I'd be glad to entertain any questions.
Should we promulgate this to move forward? Or do we have to?
There would be
no changes.
Yeah.
No change.
All right. Any questions on webless migratory? Well, let's go to waterfowl, Tom.
Okay, and I do have a presentation for today. Today, we will be providing the information on the development of Kansas's waterfowl hunting seasons, including staff recommendations for the 2024-25 waterfowl hunting seasons. Please note that there was a correction in the briefing items under goose seasons, and I'll highlight as we move forward. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service developed frameworks that establish maximum bag and possession limits, season lengths, earliest opening and latest closing dates. The briefing item contains how the federal frameworks are developed and the framework restrictions. States must operate within these frameworks when establishing state-specific migratory game bird seasons. The federal frameworks provide the biological sideboards in order to sustain waterfowl harvest. At the state process, the selection of waterfowl season dates are different than our resident game, as well as webless migratory species, in that they are adopted via a set of regulations. Instead of being adopted by a set of regulations, they are adopted by a commission's consensus. This is due to the season variability and the later timeframe which seasons are addressed. Kansas officially adopts their seasons through its annual season selection sent to the Fish and Wildlife Service on May 1st. Again, the briefing item has a summary of the federal frameworks. There are no changes in the federal frameworks from the previous year. In 2021, Kansas Wildlife and Parks incorporated a decision tool to assist in the season setting process by identifying important season date parameters for each of the Kansas waterfowl zones. This process has developed to season selection stability, reduce bias, and add transparency in the season date selection process. The briefing item does include staff recommendations for the 2024-25 waterfowl seasons. Similar to previous years, staff was recommending 9 days in the high plains beginning the third Saturday of September and a 16-day seasons for the low plains beginning the second Saturday of September. The difference in the days in the high plains and low plains is due to the additional 23 days afforded during the 74-day general duck seasons of the high plains unit and the 107-day restriction within the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Staff recommendations are again to hold 2 consecutive days for youth, veterans, and active military. Staff recommends that they're held 1 week prior to the general opening seasons in each of the duck zones. And as mentioned previously, staff is incorporating instruction decision tools to assist in removing bias and stabilize season date selections. In review of migration patterns, harvest, hunter activity, habitat conditions, weather patterns, holidays, hunter surveys, and hunter communications, and other variables, staff believes this structure provides the best overall opportunity for the varied waterfowl hunting communities in Kansas. On the slide in the briefing items are the season's staff recommendations for this season dates. Staff goose recommendations are well similar to past seasons. We are continuing with the recommended 6 Canada goose bag limit. The correction in the briefing item regards the closing date of the white front, dark, and light goose season of being February 16th, not February 9th. Again, that also would open the split for the dark and light goose seasons. Consistent with the past season, staff recommend a 15-day falcon season in Kansas low play zones. Due to the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, 107-day restrictions does not allow any additional hawking days in the high plains unit. Kansas migratory game bird season selections are due to the Fish and Wildlife Service by May 1st. Commission action will be required at that time. With that, thank you for your attention, and I'll be glad to stand for any questions.
Any questions for Tom?
When was the last year that our waterfowl hunter survey was done?
Was 2019, so there it is updated. So we'd also be looking at zones redefinement in the next couple of years. So there'd probably be a hunter survey coming out likely late this fall. Before the 2019, almost from 2014 to 2019, we almost had annual surveys, and we've seen some very heavy hunter fatigue or survey fatigue in that. So at this time, we'll probably be looking at revisiting those surveys.
Will that be looking back at this past season and things, or more you're looking at their requests for the future?
It'll be mostly, well, first of all, the duck zones, what changes see in the duck zones, which are also highly linked to season dates, but more or less, what are some of the underlying preferences when hunters want to hunt, and not so much just a poll of season dates.
I recognize the survey fatigue that you guys have to deal with. You want responses for accurate information, but it is getting to be enough time in there that
correct.
It would be helpful to have updated input from the hunters.
would it be possible to ask in your survey if everybody's happy with the Canadian goose limit?
So we have asked that in the 2014 to 2019 survey. So they're kind of couple different ways to look at it. In 2014, it was about the same. And then during the 2019 survey, the 6 goose egg limit was common. So there is pros and cons of each of going to, we were more limited, restrictive than what the federal frameworks are allow. Canada goose harvest is our main way to maintain resident populations, not only here in Kansas, but throughout the flyway. So it's an important management tool for that. But there is, again, things like hunter satisfaction that are rolled up in that as well. Similar to season dates, there's a lot of preferences, and I understand for those reasons behind those preferences.
Okay. Anybody have questions for Tom?
So no, this will be for commission consensus at the April meeting for adoption, but it doesn't need to move through the legislative process.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, the next 7 workshop items have been here many times. They just sort of sat there. And there's no presentation on them. Terry, did you have anything to add?
No, not, sorry. Terry Bruce, legal counsel. No, I have nothing further to add. All of these are somewhere in the process, either the Department of Administration or the Attorney General's office being looked at or actively edited.
Okay. Well, the next item on agenda is circle back to general public comment on non-agenda items. Does anybody have anything? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Marty Burrell. I'm a biologist currently working with the Black-footed Ferret Recovery Program here in Kansas. We conduct the surveys annually in the fall that look for Black-footed ferrets, survivability, reproduction, and distribution on our 10,000-acre site in Logan County. This site has been established since 2007, and we've been able to demonstrate its success as one of the 34 sites across Western United States over the last 16 years. What I'm here to ask for today, I'm a member of not only that group, but also the National Black-footed Ferret Recovery Implementation Team as an outreach subcommittee member, and also with the Science and Conservation Team. We have seen how other states have developed working plans that help support their Black-footed ferret recovery sites. All recovery sites across the Western United States are administered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and states such as Wyoming and Colorado and Utah have contributed their efforts toward their sites by developing management plans and working teams that help support the site through the use of their biologists and other stakeholders within their site to tailor their goals in their states to the goals of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We don't have such a plan here in Kansas. And although Kansas is listed as a stakeholder in this program, we're not seeing the kind of material support that we could really use for our site. The kind of material support I'm talking about is the help from the departmental biologists for doing habitat assessment, prairie dog density studies, assisting with the surveys, making requests on allocations of release of new ferrets on the site. All of these are the kinds of things that the other states are doing. Landholder incentives, and also landowner communications, which is a big thing to alleviate the concerns landholders and landowners may have if ferrets stray onto their property. So understanding that the safe harbor agreements that are in place on these sites protect landowners from, if a ferret were to be killed on their land, they're not going to be held responsible. So all of these are the functions that states can and do take over by establishing these management plans. And I have a couple of copies of ones from Colorado and Wyoming that would be easy enough for our state to be able to, look at and then establish what of those kinds of activities the state could support using its own personnel. We could really use that kind of support. The personnel with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service are stretched across 34 sites across the United States, and they are limited in their personnel and their budgets to having to support all 34 sites. So the additional support by the state here in Kansas would be of great benefit to the recovery of our site. And we think we're doing well. As a member of that survey team, we were able to identify 30 ferrets. This is not a census. This is simply an overview of the ferrets that could be caught. We can document reproduction. We can document that the ferrets are distributing themselves across this 10,000 acre property. One of the benefits of our site here is that we are the only one of the 34 sites across the United States that has never documented plague. And so that makes it a very interesting site to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So we're asking for that kind of material support. If a management plan can be developed or included in the management plans of other endangered or threatened species here in the state, it would be of great help. We really need the help and support from the department on surveys. Last year, we had nobody from the department attending our surveys, except on their own time. So, it would really be of great benefit to us to have the support of the expertise of the department. So with that, that's, those are the main points I wanted to make. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I've been with the program now for 15 years.
Are you putting any more out?
Yes. In the fall of this last year, we released 11 ferrets. The year before we released, I think it was 23 ferrets. The data that we collect from the surveys largely contributes to the decisions that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service makes on how many ferrets we need. The other important data that needs to be collected is prairie dog densities and prairie dog habitat assessment. And that's where we run into some limitations. If there's not enough money to contract a person to do that, or if the biologists don't have time to make it to our site, then we don't have the data available. Having that data available allows our survey teams to concentrate their efforts in finding ferrets. This is surveying involves all night, every night, actions from volunteers of going across the survey area and spotlighting. So it's labor intensive. And that's why I think we used 33 volunteers this last fall. And we're able to establish really good data for the presence of these ferrets. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service determines how many ferrets get released based on our data. and how many they have available. This is the breeding time for the black-footed ferret conservation centers, breeding population. We get our ferrets from them, and they decide how many ferrets based on needs, availability, and the viability of the site that we're going to get. So, the better our data is, the better off our requests are going to be, and they can tailor how many ferrets we get.
Okay.
I would just like to say I'm really in favor of doing a working group or something to support this effort. So I don't know what that would take, who we have to get involved, but I would really be in favor of supporting this.
Thank you.
We'll take it under advisement.
Thank you.
Any other public comment on non-agenda items?
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, we do got one online.
Okay.
Mitchell, I'm gonna unmute you.
Yeah, I've never known people.
Hello, all. Just making sure my voice is coming across.
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. Yeah, I just want to introduce myself real quick. Good afternoon. My name is Mitchell Moorhead. I'm an avid and dedicated public lands waterfowl hunter who has greatly enjoyed using all the public land that Kansas has had to offer in very recent years, and really fell in love with the outdoors even further after growing up a fisherman and then transitioning over towards hunting waterfowl for my primary use of Kansas public lands. I want to keep this concise, but I did just want to raise a couple questions regarding the entry time restrictions for wetland access that is being noted in the new public land regulations on the briefing book from this meeting summary. Being an avid waterfowl hunter on Kansas public lands, I do foresee this restricted 5 a.m. entry time causing more issues than it fixes with pressure for the hunters using the land, in addition to causing some potential safety concerns towards the end of the season. Firstly, removing a Kansas resident's open ability to access Kansas public land for the purpose of hunting seems sort of unfair to those who put in more time, work, and dedication to scouting and wanting to be in the best possible spot for their hunts. Having to resort to racing to a spot at 5 in the morning is less than ideal to people who choose to put in more work and decide to go in early and set up for a successful hunt. Second, what is the plan to distribute this regulation to hunters and enforce this regulation? I do not foresee this being an easy thing to enforce for a game warden, and I feel as if this would go potentially unenforced and really only impact negatively those who play by the rules, such as myself and a lot of others whom I hunt with, who would choose to wait outside the wetlands area until legal time of entry, leading to those who rightfully earned a prime spot by scouting and arriving outside the wetland area early, short of a positive hunting experience. The last and final concern that I have, and arguably the most important because it is due to safety, what happens to waterfowl hunters looking to hunt these areas when the freeze occurs? 5 a.m. to 30. 1 second here. The 5 a.m. to 30 minutes until sunrise time, in my opinion, is not enough time to safely navigate a frozen wetland and create an area of open water within that wetland area for purposes of hunting. This does cause a really unfortunate situation where those people who show up to hunt a Kansas public land are given an inadequate amount of time to get into an area, safely establish an effective hunting blind and spread set up in potentially thick ice and in the really cold weather. I also feel as if this could potentially incentivize folks to set up on top of one another if limited naturally open water exists in a completely frozen wetland, potentially creating a further unsafe hunting environment with firearms being discharged in close proximity to other hunters. These are just a couple of the immediate concerns and questions that I had with this regulation going into place, as I know it's been enforced in Neosho for quite some time, and now it looks to be spreading to some other wildlife areas that I have frequented in my time hunting, and just foresee this being potentially detrimental to the enjoyment of our great public land hunting opportunities here in the state of Kansas. And I was just curious to see if anybody could elaborate on why that's maybe being enforced or going into regulation.
Yeah, Stuart Schrog, Deputy Secretary. So you're correct that it has been implemented at Neosho for quite several years now, and it has been working very successfully. And the reason why it was implemented there and being proposed at other properties is is we were combating issues of hunters setting up at 2 a.m. the day before, monopolizing areas and going in, camping out overnight, and pretty much, like I said, monopolizing those areas from an enforcement standpoint between public land staff and law enforcement division game wardens. They've been successful in enforcing it at Neosho. They really feel like waterfowl use has and harvest has increased because of these restrictions. You know, people going in all hours of the night, hazing ducks off the water, gives them more of an opportunity to rest throughout the night when everybody can access at that specified time. So there are several reasons why it was implemented at Neosho, and it's been successful there. And that's why we continue to look at other properties and implementing on those properties as well. Yeah, so safety wise, it has been a free for all in the middle of the night too. You don't know where people are set up. You walk into an area and you don't know where people are at, so you end up on their lap basically. And so having this set time where everybody can access at equal intervals, we really feel like has been a benefit.
Mr. Chair, I might throw out, I remember talking with folks at Neosho and they said everybody's lined up, but in 20 minutes, everybody in that parking lot is out on the water and ready to hunt. So they were very impressed at how organized, how well behaved the hunters were and how quickly they were able to get on the water.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, there's no more. Well, that's the extent of our agenda. Do we need to set a future meeting date, Sheila?
No, we're under some discussion. We may forego the August meeting and go into September. I'm working with Dan and Terry, legal staff on that, and whether it doesn't specifically say we have to have 7 meetings a year. You know, we used to have 6 and then we went to 7 and we've kind of rolled around. So we're trying to decide with this new format of the way things are promulgated. You know, we used to do it because seasons were a certain time. We had to pass something at a certain time, but you know, things aren't quite going that way now. So we're discussing maybe getting rid of that August meeting. So until we know that for sure, we do have April and June set. We'll discuss that August meeting and we may not have one till September. So, but we are discussing that and whether we can make that work and get everything passed when we need to. So
Okay, thank you.
April
April
25th
25th
in
in
Salina.
Salina at the K-State campus. And June 20th in Hayes at the Hilton Garden Inn and Convention Center.
You said Hayes?
Hayes,
Finally got close to home.
All right, is there any new business, old business, anything to come before the group? Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, Gerald.
Thank you, Harold.